At my husband's will reading, his mother smirked and said, "Everything belongs to me." The lawyer smiled and said, "Actually, he left you a special message." Her smirk disappeared when she read. I never thought my life would turn into something out of a courtroom drama, but here we are. I had been married to my husband, Daniel, for 10 years. We had built a beautiful life together, love, laughter, a home that we worked hard for. But throughout those years, there was always a dark cloud looming over us. That cloud was his mother, Margaret. From the moment I met her, I knew she didn't like me. She didn't hide it, either. She made it very clear that she thought I wasn't good enough for her son. "You're just after his money," she'd say, even though Daniel and I both worked hard to build our life together. The truth was, she wanted to control him, just like she always had. Margaret had always been a force of nature, controlling, manipulative, and cruel. She treated Daniel like he was still a little boy who needed her permission to live his life. He spent years trying to earn her love, but she only gave him affection when he did exactly what she wanted. When he married me, she saw it as a betrayal. She despised that he had chosen me over her. Despite everything, Daniel still loved his mother. I never stood in the way of their relationship, though I often had to be the one to comfort him when she cut him down with her words. He wanted her approval so badly. He wanted to believe that deep down, she loved him the way a mother should. Then, 6 months ago, Daniel passed away. It wasn't sudden, he had been battling a long illness. We had time to prepare, to talk about everything. And one of the things he made sure to handle was his will. He knew his mother would come after me. He knew how she was. Which brings us to today. I sat in the lawyer's office, my hands clasped tightly together, my grief still raw. Margaret sat across from me, wearing an expensive black dress, acting as if she were the grieving widow. She had barely spoken to me since Daniel's passing, except to sneer at me at the funeral, telling me it was only a matter of time before I was out on the streets where I belonged. She truly believed that. She sat there, smirking, waiting for the lawyer to confirm what she thought she already knew, that she was about to inherit everything. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading Daniel's will. "To my beloved wife, I leave our home, our savings, and all of my personal assets." Margaret's smirk faltered. But she quickly recovered, leaning back in her chair with an arrogant air. She clearly thought that the real money, his investments, his stocks, the things she believed she had a claim to, were going to her. The lawyer continued. "To my mother, Margaret, I leave." He paused, then picked up a separate piece of paper. His lips twitched as if he was holding back a smile. "I leave this personal message." Margaret frowned. "What?" The lawyer slid the paper across the desk to her. "Daniel left you a letter." She snatched it up, unfolding it with a look of barely contained fury. As she read, her smirk disappeared entirely. Her face turned red, her hands clenched the paper so tightly that I thought she might tear it in half. Her lips moved as she read the words, and then she slammed the paper down on the desk. "This is a joke," she hissed. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What does it say?" The lawyer, still composed, said, "Daniel wanted to make sure his final words to his mother were clear." I reached for the letter, and to my surprise, the lawyer handed me a copy. As I read, my eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of pride. "Mother, if you are reading this, it means you are probably expecting to take everything from my wife. But I need you to understand something: you have never controlled me, and you will not control her. You spent my entire life trying to manipulate me, trying to make me feel like I was never good enough. But in my final moments, I found peace in knowing that I had built a life with someone who truly loved me. Not for my money, not for what I could give her, but for me. You never gave me that love. And because of that, I owe you nothing. Everything I have goes to my wife, the woman who stood by me when you never did." The room was silent. Margaret's hands trembled as she shoved the letter away from her. "This is absurd," she spat. "He didn't mean this. He was sick. He didn't know what he was saying." The lawyer sighed, as if he had been expecting this reaction. "Mrs. Caldwell, I can assure you that your son was of sound mind when he wrote this. And, as per his wishes, you have not been left with anything." Margaret's face twisted with rage. "This is your doing," she snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You poisoned him against me. You turned him against his own mother." I finally spoke, my voice calm. "No, Margaret. You did that all by yourself." She stood up so fast that the chair nearly toppled over. "This isn't over," she seethed. "I'll fight this. I'll take you to court. That house should be mine. That money should be mine. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. You're welcome to contest the will, but I'll warn you, Daniel took extra precautions to ensure that it was ironclad. You'd be wasting your time and money. Margaret glared at him, then at me. I could see the fury in her eyes, the disbelief that she had lost. That she had no power here. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the space she had just occupied. Then I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Daniel had stood up to her in the end. Even in death, he had protected me. But something in the pit of my stomach told me this wasn't the last I'd hear from Margaret. And I was right. Because what happened next was even worse. Margaret stormed out of the lawyer's office that day, but I knew deep in my gut that she wasn't done with me. She wasn't the type to accept defeat. She had spent her whole life getting her way by intimidation, manipulation, and sheer cruelty. And now, losing to me, a woman she had always seen as beneath her, was something she couldn't stand. I had barely made it home before the phone started ringing. I ignored it at first, but after the fourth or fifth time, I picked it up. Margaret didn't even bother with pleasantries. You think you've won, don't you? Her voice was shaking, not with sadness, but with rage. I stayed silent. She let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea who you're dealing with. That house, that money, it should have been mine. You were nothing before you married my son, and you'll be nothing again soon. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. Daniel made his choice. And you need to accept it. She scoffed. We'll see about that. Then she hung up. I tried to tell myself she was just bluffing, just lashing out. But something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. The first attack a week passed. Then another. Things were quiet. Too quiet. Then, one morning, I woke up to find an eviction notice taped to my front door. My heart stopped. I yanked it off and read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. It claimed that the house that Daniel and I had bought together, was not legally mine. That it somehow still belonged to Margaret. It didn't make sense. The lawyer had assured me the will was ironclad. Daniel had made sure I was protected. I rushed to call the lawyer. He was calm, but serious. She's trying to contest the will, he said. She's claiming that your marriage was fraudulent, that you manipulated Daniel when he was sick. She's saying that the house should revert to his closest blood relative. I felt sick. She can't actually do this, right? She can try. He sighed. But she doesn't have a case. She's grasping at straws. That doesn't mean it won't be a fight. And it was. She dragged me into court, making wild accusations about how I had trapped Daniel, how I had taken advantage of his illness, how I had isolated him from his loving family. It was a circus. She lied through her teeth, crying crocodile tears on the stand, acting like she had been a doting mother who had just been cruelly pushed aside. I sat there, my hands clenched, my nails digging into my palms so hard they left marks. I wanted to scream. To stand up and tell everyone the truth, that she had never cared about Daniel. That she had only ever cared about controlling him, about owning him. But I stayed quiet. I let the lawyer do his job. And in the end, the judge saw through her. The case was thrown out. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The escalation a few days after the court ruling, I came home late one evening to find my front door slightly open. My stomach dropped. I knew I had locked it when I left. I pushed the door open slowly, my hands shaking. The house was dark, eerily silent. I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I saw it. My living room was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Pictures smashed. Papers scattered everywhere. Someone had been here. I backed out of the house, my fingers fumbling to dial 911. The police arrived quickly. They did a sweep of the house, but whoever had done this was already gone. Nothing valuable had been taken, just ruined. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message. I didn't need to guess who had sent it. The police couldn't do much. No signs of forced entry, they told me. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I stared at them, my hands still shaking. Yes. But of course, I had no proof. And Margaret wasn't done. The breaking point the next few weeks were a nightmare. Strange cars parked outside my house at odd hours. My trash cans overturned in the middle of the night. Dead flowers left on my doorstep. I barely slept. I felt like I was being hunted. Then, one evening, I heard a knock at my door. I checked the peephole. It was Margaret. I almost didn't open it. Every instinct told me not to. But I was tired of hiding. Tired of being afraid. I opened the door. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold. "Enjoying the house?" she asked, her voice smooth, mocking. I didn't answer. Her smile widened. "I'm not going to stop, you know. You might think you've won, but this isn't over. You took my son from me. And now, I'm going to take everything from you." Something in me snapped. For weeks, I had been living in fear. But now, looking at her, this bitter, hateful woman who had spent her whole life trying to control everything, I felt something else. I felt done. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. "Listen to me, Margaret," I said, my voice steady. "You already lost. Daniel saw you for what you were. And no matter what you do now, you will never win. This house? It's mine. My life? It's mine. And you? You have nothing. You did this to yourself." For the first time, she looked scared. I saw it, just for a moment, a flicker in her eyes. Then she sneered. "We'll see about that." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. But I knew, this wasn't over. And I was right. Because the next morning, I got a call from the lawyer. And what he told me? It changed everything. I barely slept that night. Margaret's words haunted me. I kept replaying the way she had stood on my doorstep, her voice dripping with venom, promising that she wasn't done with me. And she was right. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. "We have a problem," he said, his voice tight. I gripped the phone. "What now?" He sighed. "Margaret just filed a new lawsuit. She's claiming that Daniel had a secret will. One that leaves everything to her." I nearly dropped the phone. "A secret will? That's ridiculous." "I know. But she's submitted paperwork. And worse," he hesitated. "She's got a witness." I felt my blood turn ice cold. "Who?" There was a long pause. Then he said a name I never expected. "Daniel's best friend." The ultimate betrayal. David had been Daniel's best friend since childhood. He had been the best man at our wedding. He had cried at Daniel's funeral. I had trusted him. And now he was siding with her? I called him immediately. He picked up, his voice calm, too calm. "Hey," he said, like nothing was wrong. "Tell me this isn't true." My voice shook. "Tell me you're not helping her." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "Look, I don't want to be involved in this, but Margaret, she made some good points. She said Daniel changed his mind before he died. That he didn't want to leave you everything." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "That's a lie, and you know it." "She has a document," he said, almost like he was trying to convince himself. "And I saw Daniel sign it." My vision blurred with rage. "You're lying. Or she's paying you to lie." Silence. That silence told me everything. "How much?" I whispered. "How much is she paying you to betray your best friend?" He didn't answer. I hung up. A dead man's secret. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. He was already sifting through the so-called new will. "This is a forgery," he said immediately. "Daniel was meticulous. He wouldn't have written a second will without going through me." I clenched my fists. "So how do we prove it?" He pulled out the original will. "The signatures don't match perfectly. It's close, but not exact. We'll get a handwriting expert." Then he frowned. "But there's something else." He turned to his computer and pulled up a file. Before Daniel passed, he made a video. He wanted to make sure his wishes were crystal clear. My breath caught. "A video?" He nodded. He asked me to hold on to it, just in case. "I think now is the time to use it." He clicked play. And there was Daniel. Looking straight into the camera. Daniel's final words. His face was thinner, his eyes tired, but his voice was strong. "If you're watching this, it means my mother is trying to take what isn't hers." Tears welled in my eyes. Daniel continued, his voice unwavering. "Margaret, if you are sitting in a courtroom right now, trying to lie your way into my estate, I need you to know something. He leaned forward, eyes burning into the camera. I knew you would do this. Margaret's fake will? Useless. David's lies? Worthless. Because Daniel had outplayed them from beyond the grave. But what he said next? It made everything explode. The truth comes out. Daniel took a deep breath. Margaret, I know about the money. I froze. The lawyer's eyes widened. Wait, what? Daniel's voice was sharper now. I know you stole from me. From my father. From the company. My heart pounded. What was he talking about? Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I know you paid David off years ago. I sucked in a sharp breath. Daniel knew. He knew that his mother and his best friend had been working together long before he died. Then he pulled out papers. Documents. Proof. I found the accounts, he said. The secret transfers. The missing funds. You thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. I couldn't breathe. Daniel knew his mother had been stealing from him. He knew she had been hiding money, using shady accounts, covering her tracks. And he had been gathering evidence. Then he smiled. A cold, knowing smile. That's why I set a trap. The ultimate revenge. The video ended. Silence filled the room. Then my lawyer let out a low whistle. Well, that changes everything. I swallowed hard. What did he mean by a trap? He stood up. I think it's time we find out. We dug into Daniel's records. His emails. His files. And what we found? It was explosive. Bank transfers. Fraudulent documents. Bribes. Margaret hadn't just been trying to steal now, she had been stealing for years. She had drained Daniel's father's estate, moved money through fake companies, laundered thousands. And David? He had helped her. I sat there, stunned. So, what do we do? My lawyer grinned. We don't just fight back. He picked up his phone. We burn them to the ground. The final blow. The next day, we filed criminal charges. Fraud. Theft. Conspiracy. Margaret and David were about to be buried in legal hell. Margaret showed up at my house one last time. Her face was pale. Call off your lawyer, she said, voice trembling. Let's make a deal. I stepped forward, looked her dead in the eyes. No, and for the first time in her miserable, manipulative life. Margaret knew she had lost. Margaret thought she had power. She thought she could bully, manipulate, and scheme her way to victory like she always had. But Daniel had seen her coming. And now, even from beyond the grave, he was the one pulling the strings. The evidence we uncovered was devastating. Bank fraud. Money laundering. Stolen inheritance funds. Wire transfers that linked back to her. David wasn't just a lying snake, he was deep in it, helping her cover her tracks. My lawyer wasted no time. He handed everything over to the authorities. And then? We sat back and watched the dominoes fall. Margaret's downfall. It started with the IRS freezing her accounts. Every dollar she had stolen, every shady transaction, under investigation. Then came the police raid. I woke up to the sound of sirens outside Margaret's house. The news broke that morning, authorities investigating financial crimes linked to the Caldwell estate. Margaret was dragged out in handcuffs. Her face, once so smug, so full of arrogance, was ashen. She looked around as if searching for someone to save her, someone to make this go away. But there was no one left. David tried to run. They caught him at the airport. He had a one-way ticket to Mexico and $50,000 in cash stuffed in his suitcase. Too bad for him, the police got to him first. Courtroom justice. Margaret's trial was brutal. The evidence was undeniable. The stolen funds, the fraudulent accounts, the fake will, the bribery, it was all laid out in front of the judge. And the best part? Daniel had recorded a second video. This one was meant for court. It was longer, sharper, and had receipts. I will never forget the look on Margaret's face when it was played in front of the judge, the jury, and a packed courtroom. Her own son, exposing her for the fraud she was. Her hands clenched the table so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked like she wanted to crawl out of her own skin. The judge was ruthless. 15 years in prison for financial fraud. David got 10 years for aiding and abetting. The final blow. Margaret tried one last time to reach out to me. A letter arrived at my house from prison. I almost threw it away. But curiosity got the better of me. It was short. You think you won. But you'll always be nothing without Daniel. You took him from me. I'll never forgive you. I stared at it for a long time. Then I did something that I knew would haunt her. I sent it back. Unopened. Margaret lost everything. Her money, her home, her fake reputation. I sold the house she had fought so hard to steal from me. Used the money to start fresh somewhere new. And as for me? I lived. I healed. I moved on. Because in the end, Daniel won. And that was the best revenge of all.